Welcome to Popcorn Psychology, the podcast where we watch blockbuster movies and psychoanalyze them. My name is Brittany Brownfield, and I'm a child therapist, and I'm joined by
Ben Stover, individual therapist.
Hannah Espinoza, marriage and family therapist.
We're all licensed clinical professional counselors, also known as therapists, who practice out of Chicago. Even though we are licensed mental health professionals, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes and to fulfill our love of dissecting pop culture in all forms.
Please remember that even though we are all licensed therapists, we aren't your therapist.
If you are struggling with mental health symptoms, please find a local mental health provider.
So we are finally talking about Inside Out, a much requested episode for sure, and a beloved movie of the three of us. So it is kind of amazing it's taken us this long to get here, but we're here. So Inside Out just briefly follows a 11-year-old girl named Riley as she moves away from the only town she's ever lived in Minnesota, to San Francisco for her father's job. And we get to see sort of the inside workings of her mind in terms of all of her emotional states. So joy, sadness, anger, disgust, and fear are the main feelings that live inside of this kind of control panel of her brain that dictates how she's feeling. So we get to watch this girl as she goes through all those feelings and kind of grows up in front of our eyes through this big life change of moving to a whole different city and finding new friends and getting to know herself again. So today we're going to be talking about feelings. Yay!
Yay, feelings.
Basically,
unless you're from the Midwest, in which case you're going, ooh, I'm tuning out of this episode right now.
I don't know feelings. I don't know her. So we're talking about emotional intelligence. Kind of why do we have feelings? This idea of good feelings versus bad feelings, which is much a topic of this movie. We're also going to be talking about growing up and kind of the stages of development as we kind of see in this movie. And they're also going to be talking about treatment and final thoughts as usual. So let's jump right into it. Why do we have feelings?
I feel like this is a conversation I have with clients every day. So this is a really rehearsed speech. So if you happen to be someone who's ever seen me, I'm sorry. Because you already know what I'm going to say. But the reason we have feelings is to assign meaning to our experience. Feelings are important, and they are the only way that we have to encode information of our lived experience with relevance that assigns it usefulness for future survival. It's a really nerdy way to say basically you need to understand what you lived in order to continue to grow and survive and make useful knowledge out of information. And you don't feel anything about your trip to the grocery store 3 times ago. You don't know what played on the radio 6 weeks ago. You don't remember what the weather was like on your drive to work 8 months ago, because those things never crossed the line of emotional relevance. They had no impact on your survival unless they did. You, generally speaking, aren't going to remember a lot of things, and they're just going to go into a general memory pool because they don't have any emotion to tie them to a point of survival usefulness. And that's why we have feelings.
Yeah, and so exactly what you're saying, it gives poignancy to life, having feelings. It gives meaning to the experiences we have. As you see in this movie, feelings imprint upon memories she has, and when she's reflecting upon those memories, like you're saying, it gives it that poignancy and why it means something to her now, and not just her now, but also her identity, as we'll talk a little bit more later, of who she is and why things have importance. What I really like in watching this movie, especially when I first saw it, was this idea of good feelings versus bad feelings. I think it's a prominent theme of this movie. And because we first get introduced to feelings in general by the concept of joy, that emotion.
Yes.
And she's the first one that comes up, which makes sense because it's a very basic feeling. All the 5 feelings are the sort of basic feelings. And I find Joy, I'm just going to say it right now, I find the character Joy very obnoxious. I don't like her when I watch this movie. And I think it's because she conveys this message, which makes sense, that her feeling, the feeling of joy, is the best feeling to have. And that she can kind of make sense of why the other feelings exist. Like fear keeps Riley safe, and disgust keeps her from, what did she say, like
poisoning herself, basically.
Poisoning herself, she said, socially and literally.
Yes.
And like, an anger also makes you heard, and that pushes things forward. But she says early in the movie, I don't understand why sadness is here. I don't really understand her function, and I wish she'd get out of here. I think she even kind of mentions that she's tried to get rid of sadness.
Yes, she
and
does.
can't quite figure out how to make her leave.
Yes. And
it's so interesting because at this stage of the movie, Riley's 11. So she's been with all these feelings for 11 years. And Joy still can't wrap her head around why sadness is important or valid.
And for those of us that have grown up in the Midwest our entire lives, which is all three of us, in different versions of the Midwest, but yet still somehow it's all the same.
Yes.
Barf.
This is a question that we go, oh, do people have good and bad feelings? And people say, yes, joy is a good feeling and fine is the only other one you're allowed to have.
Yeah, that is accurate. That is definitely accurate.
Because in the Midwestern culture in particular, the how are you doing? If the answer is other than fine, everybody immediately starts crawling out of their skin and going like, oh, didn't ask for the truth, man. Like, no, because they're like, oh yeah, I've got like my brother's got cancer and my dog is dying, and everyone's like, ooh, yeah, I hear my mom calling, I gotta go.
The amount of pure confusion on people's faces when you answer other than fine.
You're not following the social script.
I'm not following the rules. I'm supposed to just be fucking fine.
Because how you're feeling is a salutation. It's not a general inquiry into how you're actually doing.
Exactly.
And even when people feel like they're genuinely checking in, like, how you been? They still don't want to know, really.
They do
how
not.
you been.
They really do not.
And they also don't know how to hide it from off their face. They don't know how to. They haven't gotten that fucking far in being a human, I guess. I don't fucking know.
Well, I think it's just because what you were saying,
because they're uncomfortable.
We're socialized to believe that there are, because even the idea of good feelings versus bad feelings, this is something we're gonna have a lot of scripts that we say in therapy, so we might sound a little robotic, because this is a script I give a lot. This is something I tell a lot of my clients. Which is that there are no good feelings versus bad feelings. I'm also very careful as the clinician not to use those terms.
Yes.
Unless I'm conveying this message, which is this idea that they're like happiness, like, horniness, excitement, like all this. So there are good feelings to have.
Yes.
And then like sadness, embarrassment, fear, anxiety, those are bad feelings to have. And that you shouldn't. And if you're doing therapy right, or if your therapist is good at their job, you will stop having quote unquote bad feelings and only have good feelings. So the bubble I have to burst for clients a lot is that that's not a thing, and that our job is more to help us take in the whole spectrum of feelings and to honor the whole spectrum of feelings. And that's okay. That you need all these things to feel like a balanced human being, and that they give, as we notice in this movie, it gives fullness to our experiences. You can't just have the positive ones. It's like Pandora's box. If we're gonna feel, period, we have to be open to feeling everything. And if we're gonna if we're trying to turn off those bad feelings, you're also limiting your ability to actually feel joy and these more quote unquote good positive feelings. And that's something I have to get to grips with clients pretty early on if they're really gonna do the work, which is you have to be willing to feel everything to a tolerable degree. Like, I want to be mindful of that. But we can't be picking and choosing our feelings. That's not part of the human existence. And we're going to really we're going to just keep hitting a wall if we're getting to this place where, like, I shouldn't be feeling these negative, bad feelings.
Yes, because I feel like what happens is that you're so busy trying to decide if it's a good or bad feeling and whether or not you should be having it, that you're not experiencing it anyway. And I think the other piece that people don't really understand, and I agree with both of you, I talk about feelings and how it's okay to feel however you're feeling, because we don't control our feelings.
That's also very true.
And we don't control our thoughts. Mm-hmm. All we do is we control the behavior and the way that we communicate those thoughts and feelings that we have.
Yeah.
That's the only thing we have control over. The amount of times that I say that to a client, and look, I don't come in hot with that the first session, because I know that it can feel like I'm wrong, and I would be worried that would make a client feel like I wasn't meeting them where they are. if I give that information too soon. It just seems like whenever I talk about this, the look of confusion of like, no, I can control my thoughts. I can control my feelings.
Yes.
I'm like, no, you can't. But I understand why it feels that way.
Yeah.
But this is something that I talk about with every single person that I've worked with, talking about. And a part of it is really helping them accept a part of their existence is that you're going to have feelings. And learning how to communicate those to a partner or to a friend or to a family, or learning, I spend a lot of time helping people figure out how to decide what feelings they're having for themselves. We are so socialized to avoid feelings at every turn that we can.
Yeah, like a good resource for everybody that I teach of all ages is the emotion wheel. If you Google emotion wheel, it'll look like a color wheel where the middle circle, it's like 3 circles, and the middle circle is like primary feelings, kind of like the ones talked about in this movie, and then they kind of go out where they get more and more specific. Like it'll be fear, but then fear can be anxious or nervous, and then it goes out to even like a differentiated versions of those words. And so that's a good resource to develop a bigger emotional vocabulary if that's part of like the feelings identification is where you're at.
I sent one of those to a client this week.
I love the feelings wheel.
I love it.
It's the screensaver. Like a typical therapist, it's the backdrop of my computer.
Oh, that's glorious.
Well, it's so important because so many people are part of, like, we all have cultures and subcultures that we're a part of.
Yeah.
Like each and every one of us have
Absolutely.
so very many things that make up our identity. And for so many people, every single one of your subcultures tell you that there are such things as bad feelings.
Yeah, so we're not even going to learn those.
And well, that you're wrong or broken if you have them. Like so many of my clients that I see have that. And you can look at like Midwesterners. Yep, check. So Americans, I quote Robin Williams so often because I love that man. I know that if you listen to the show, you figured it out. Like Robin Williams was probably among my favorite actors ever, favorite entertainers. But he, in his stand-up, would talk about, remember that America was a country founded by people so uptight that the English told them to get the fuck out.
No fucking doubt.
And that always stuck with me when I was, first encountered that at 18 when in his routine. I was like, that's just funny. But now I go like, ooh, that's funny for some different reasons.
Well, that just makes you realize the foundation upon which we were all built.
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely.
The puritanical mentality has never left America, and people need to understand that Americans in general, let alone Midwesterners, let alone men, let alone several various different ethnic groups that all consider, like, basically, if you're having feelings, you're wrong, and that creates anxiety in and of itself, that I shouldn't be having these feelings, and if I'm having these feelings, I'm broken.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Like, going back to this, like, the amount of times, I'm sure you guys can agree, that people really come to therapy thinking that our job is going to help them to not have those feelings anymore.
Yeah.
Yep. And
it's intense.
I'm gonna paint with a very broad brush here. False.
Yeah.
Full stop.
Yeah.
You need to have all of the feelings. And one of the things that I love to explain is once I understand someone's basic point of view and know that I can speak their language, even though I am not personally a religious person, who's going like, okay, if you're a religious person, let's say we believe that God made a perfect being in his image, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If that's the language that person speaks.
Absolutely, right?
Mm-hmm. It's not the language I speak, but if that's their language,
yeah,
I have
course.
to speak theirs because I'm a therapist. I can't,
Yep.
push my views on anybody, but I can adjust to their lexicon, right? But looking at that, God is a perfect being that made people in his image. Why then would you have feelings baked into your body if every other thing as part of your body is made in his image and created in perfection, that in having you are imperfect?
Real gotcha moment.
I need Joan to come up with the gotcha dancers from Parks and Rec.
Wow.
Joe
Really?
Calamezzo?
Yep.
You really threw me for a second.
Yes, I did. But like looking at that, like you need to understand that the range of feelings that you have, the range of emotions that you have are finite within reasonable definition, and they all serve a purpose. And trying to turn them off or on or only feel the good ones is nonsense and deprives you of the ability to process emotions, because emotions, like food, must be felt. Like food needs to be digested. You eat a steak dinner with potatoes and broccoli and whatever, that you need to break the food down into the core nutrients, and your body then distributes them where they go, all over. You need to do the same thing with emotions. You ingest the information, you feel the feeling, you break the information down into useful bits, you store it in your system to be able to be accessed later, encoded properly so that it is useful. If you do not have the feeling parts, you stay stuck in a loop where your body is trying to process the information, and it keeps you stuck in the emotions, because just like eating that steak dinner, when you are done with the parts you no longer need, you've broken it down into the, you take a shit. And you let it go.
You need to take an emotional shit, guys.
You need
Everybody
to take
needs
an
to take their emotional shits. Well, bringing it back to this movie, so our main character, Riley, is going through her biggest transition so far in her life. She's moving away from home, really far away, and she's losing her social group, she's going to a different school. Like everything now is new.
That's a different climate that she'll be living in.
Yeah, it's like a whole different vibe. And going from Minnesota to San Francisco, it's all different.
Yeah,
and
San Francisco is all of the weather in one day. Minnesota has seasons. Maybe if they only have like 2.5 or 3, but depending on what part of Minnesota you're in, they still, like, San Francisco is all of the seasons that exist in one day.
Yeah. So with Riley, though, kind of going back to what you were saying about like the steak dinner kind of thing, is that she's going through a big change and not giving herself the space to really process what's going on.
Yes.
And not just herself, but also her parents are unfortunately, going back to how we're socialized to experience feelings. Both of her parents, unfortunately, reinforce this idea of like good feeling versus bad feelings by both saying to her, like her mom says, like, thank you for staying our happy girl, or you're still our happy girl. And then her dad says, where is our happy girl? And so both of her parents, unfortunately, are reinforcing this idea that she should just be that girl being happy. And unfortunately, incidentally or whatever, invalidating this deep emotional experience she's having, which is deep sadness for having lost her identity really at this point in her life. And as we know, as therapists, if you're not actively processing it, if you're trying to put on a happy face to only feel the quote unquote good feelings, your bad feelings are going to come out whether you want to or not.
Exactly.
And so how we see with her is she's starting to do quote unquote random things like crying in class when she's introducing herself, getting pissy with her parents and copping an attitude in a way that she's never copped an attitude before. She's acting out of character, I guess, is what I would say, which is what I tell clients. I go, if you don't let yourself feel all of your feelings, you're going to start doing weird shit like crying because the barista spelled your name wrong on your cup at Starbucks. Or screaming at the top of your lungs because you couldn't find parking right away. Your body is going to try to process your emotional experience with or without you.
Exactly, which is a part of why we see, and there's all different kinds of studies, but I think the ACEs study is probably one of the biggest ones, how stress and trauma, that if they're not managed in some kind of way, people end up with blood pressure, people end up with all kinds of medical things. That's just like your body has to figure out a way to deal with it. And the way that I talk about it with clients is a part of your existence has been that you're not allowed to have those feelings. And so your body has to figure out what to do with that. And sometimes, and it also has to figure out a different way to get your attention.
Yeah.
So because can be so hard to say, I'm having a really hard time.
Or disappointing someone.
Like whatever it might be, that then you get a stomach ache. Or instead and then it's like you go to the doctor and they're like, there's nothing wrong. And so a part of this is that it can exist in your body in all different kinds of ways. So you're not shutting it off like you think you are. It's not a valve. And you also don't have control of the valve.
Yeah.
Like that's just not what the experience is like. And I think we see a good example of when Riley comes home and when Joy's back, everybody's kind of back in her head at their stations. She says to her parents, I know you don't want me to feel sad.
Yeah.
And I know you need me to be happy.
And please don't be mad.
And please don't be mad.
Oh.
She's 11.
That's the part I cried when I first watched the movie. That whole scene.
100%.
It got me.
Yep, I was watching it with my 4-year-old today and like trying to explain the movie to her, and this one's it's a little above where she can grasp just yet. But
she's
like,
a little smarty, but it's a little above it.
Yeah, no, I mean she's a smarty, but she's not there yet.
Yeah,
and like the tears are running down my face, and I'm like, oh boy, how do I explain this to her? Like, not that I feel the need to explain like emoting from a movie, because I don't want to create the idea that there's good and bad feelings, because Hamlet nailed it, Shakespeare nailed it so many years ago. Things are neither good nor bad, but thinking makes them so, and that's an important thing to be teaching your children, is that it's okay to have whatever feeling or feelings compounded are happening at once, because you don't get any choice in the matter anyway. They're going to come, and the more you let them in and let them go, the more they follow the natural chain they're supposed to follow and move on, and you don't stay stuck in them. You just have the feeling like we see this little girl have in the movie, where she feels so much better when she just cries it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He lets it go.
Sorry, Ben.
Oh, no, and the first time we get like a glimpse of that is with Bing Bong.
That's what Oh, so what we see is Sadness comes over and sits next to Bing Bong and just listens to what he has to say and validates it. Mm-hmm. And that's what Riley needs.
Well, because the theme of it is, like we're talking about, and what our parents unfortunately reinforce, is the idea that happiness is the way. If you can feel joy and just attack all your bad feelings with joy, then it'll fix it for you. And that's the place to be. And that is something I identify as toxic positivity.
Absolutely.
When we act like joy, happiness, whatever is the only response we should be having to negative, quote unquote, negative stimuli. And what this movie does really, really, really well is shows that that's not the answer. And I think I see that a lot in social media now, of this sort of like reframe everything so that it's from a place of joy. And why if you watch those things, people listening, and you get that feeling in your chest that makes you want to scream, that's because that's invalidating.
Absolutely.
And you're feeling that whether you're cognizant of it or not, because what it's doing is it's shutting down all your other experiences. And so when our parents say, where's my happy girl? Or like, you're all such a happy girl, like that's also shutting down, whether they mean to or not, Riley's experience. And so what Sadness is doing in that one with Bing Bong, but also when they flash back to that scene where Riley's sad about the hockey game.
Yep.
It's demonstrating that there is purpose to sadness, because you have to just let people feel it, and validating it, leaning into the sadness actually will abate it, because you're letting that person feel it and let it kind of, like we were saying, go through their system and process through. And the only way out is through sometimes, which is what I also tell clients, is you have to lean into these feelings sometimes, most of the time. And if you appropriately do that and validate even just yourself, like telling yourself it makes sense you feel that way because blah, 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 that of itself can cause so much relief within your system that the amount of white knuckling you've been doing up till that point is going to be longer than if you just lean into that feeling.
Yes. And I think one of the things in sessions that I go over with people all the time on that same chain is I will sit with them and explain to them, like I created a diagram for it because it just helped me understand it, because I had one training that I did that blew my mind apart on this and solidified years of experience and just went, oh. And you never know whose words are going to resonate with you.
Yes.
You can be told the same thing, because therapy in many ways is the same thing repackaged in a whole different ways to sell it to therapists to do to clients. I'm like, this will make you better at understanding. It's just a different way of saying the same thing. But if you resonate with the same ancient ideas, it's important. But for me, what I was able to do is like, essentially draw the bell curve from statistics, where you draw a hill and you draw a line right down the middle of the hill and go like, on one side is unprocessed emotions and on the other side is processed emotions. But in order to get from one side to the other, you must first experience the emotion at a rate that matches the intensity of the experience in order to get it up and over the hill to a point where it can then enter what I call like the zone of understanding in the first and maybe into the second standard deviation, and then zone of healing in the third standard deviation, or otherwise when the hill is reaching its bottom on the other side. You have to, otherwise you're on the worst roller coaster ride ever, where you go chink, 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 almost, and then back down.
Yeah.
And usually what causes that is some degree of shame or dissociation that takes you either to a point where you feel so unsafe, that you feel so wrong, so threatened, or you are actually in danger that your body goes, we need to either go into hyperarousal or hypoarousal, so we either need to fight or we need to shut this shit all down in order to be safe. One of those two is going to happen. And then the other thing that happens is that you feel so bad about yourself for even doing that that you don't go, oh, nope, I don't get to feel better from this. I did something wrong. Shut it down. And that's why so many trauma-based therapies and trauma-informed therapies are so powerful and important right now, is because they acknowledge the existence of shame in the role of processing information. Because the words that hit to me that I had to actually look up what this word meant, were like, what do you mean by this word? Like, in my like metaphor of like the wavelength, right? The top of the hill needs to be able to match what your experience was. So if you broke up with a boyfriend who was your entire world, even though you're 14, the amount of emotions you need to have is pretty high. Because that's your world at that time. When you look back as an adult and go like, that was not my husband. Whatever, that dude, I hope he's well.
I was gonna marry him. We were gonna have children.
We were gonna have
You
kids.
don't get it.
You don't get. But for that person, that's their whole world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when they're, in their 30s, they look back at that dude and go like, fuck that dude. Or, hope he's well, but haven't thought about him and don't care. But looking at that model, like, people attenuate the wavelength. So what they do, attenuation means that they push down on the intensity. So if you imagine a wavelength rising up, they push it down so you feel the feeling, but not enough to resolve. And when I heard that, I went like, oh shit. So what happens basically is that you continue to feel the bad feeling, but you never feel it enough that you get over the hill and that the feeling goes where it's supposed to go, and you no longer feel it anymore because you've dealt with it.
Which is why trauma-informed care is so, so important. And that and that as we're talking about this, that for a lot of the people that I work with who have trauma history in general, which pretty much everybody has anyway.
It's always trauma.
Yeah, is that we have to, sometimes some of the pieces that we have to do, or we have to make sure that we're in the window of tolerance. When you are feeling that feeling, and we have different ways to help manage that. So there's also, for everybody, a lot of times we talk about meeting people where they are. And so it's also sometimes helping, a part of what I do in therapy is helping people figure out what the window of tolerance is for them. And so then we have a better idea about how we can help process that, bring that feeling up as high as we need to, so that it can be processed, but so that they don't go into hypo or hyper arousal.
And I would say for most people I work with, there's obviously exceptions. When someone's in deep trauma, that's a different thing. But what I also try to encourage my clients to realize is that most feelings are just high levels of discomfort.
Yes.
And we can tolerate it. Going back to how we opened this episode, what you were saying, Ben, is we have this narrative, at least in the Midwest, that any quote unquote negative feelings are so uncomfortable we cannot deal with them.
Yep.
We really cannot. We can't sit with our own. We can't sit with our own. We can't sit with others. And so we shut it down.
Other people's emotions are cool. I will be there for you. You let me know what you need. I got you. I will carry you. But my feelings, no, I'll crawl out of my skin before I think about my feelings.
But also going back to like how you doing? Oh, you're not fine? I wasn't ready to hear that.
Exactly.
I think we also, though, we outright ascribe that discomfort.
Yep.
And so really a lot of what I tell people is you can do it. You can handle it. Let's just sit in that discomfort together. Or like, let's just work on sitting in that discomfort. Because what I tell people, it's not like you're going to get to a place where this no longer feels uncomfortable. You're going to get to a place where this feeling of discomfort is just another feeling.
Yes.
And it's fine.
Yep.
And you can deal with it, and nothing horrible is going to happen, because if we keep shutting it down, we never gather evidence for ourselves that it's going to be an okay experience, that you're not going to explode, no one's going to eat you, the earth isn't going to swallow you up, like nothing catastrophic is going to happen. But if we keep shutting those feelings down, we never inform ourselves, we never give ourselves that evidence. So we can keep that narrative going inside of us that, if I have this feeling, I won't survive it. And we don't really think of it like that intensely, but that can be the level of intolerableness that we ascribe to it. And so it also is encouraging others too, because I think, going back to the validation portion, what's so great about sadness, because she is sadness, is that she's very comfortable with being sad. And so she can sit with Bing Bong, and she can come in during the hockey thing and sit in that sadness and be okay and hold that for the other person. That's, I think, where joy eventually comes around, is her realizing that sadness actually gets Riley some of her needs met.
Absolutely.
Not just get some of her needs met, but also gives meaning. Like when Joy breaks down in the old memories area, when she's holding all the old memories, she starts crying. Is she starts to realize, like, oh, all these other feelings that aren't joy actually is what allows these things to be meaningful, and sadness does serve a purpose.
Yes.
There is beauty to sadness, because I wrote in my notes, like, in order to feel nostalgia, longing, to miss someone, to love someone so deeply, you have to feel all those things. Because what I also tell clients when they go through grief or loss is, I'll say, what that means is that you love that person that deeply, or you love that experience so well. If you hadn't, you wouldn't feel the way you're feeling right now. This is sort of the other side of that coin, and the way we can reframe it a little bit to, like, kind of take back the meaning is, isn't it so beautiful that you also loved this person, this thing, this whatever so deeply? And this is the byproduct of that, is you're going to feel this after. And that's okay. And that's just part of letting ourselves love things so deeply and enjoy things so well, is that we're going to feel that bittersweetness later. And that joy does kind of come to that. And also at the very end of the movie, her parents also sit in that sadness with her. And they meet her where she's at too, and they go, we missed home too.
Yeah.
And we missed this about home. And as we see in the movie, it brings her such immense relief.
Yes.
And I think not just her, but her parents who've been feeling this strain.
Oh yeah, I'm sure they felt the same way. We see them look dysregulated the entire film. Like, mom is like getting progressively more agitated,
rubbing her
throughout
eyes
film.
and her glasses, and her dad's like pacing with his phone.
Yeah, dad gets progressively more anxious throughout the film, and mom gets progressively more agitated as she gets more and more angry at other things, that nothing's going right. This will be fine. And her narrative around this will be fine continues to get broken.
She keeps saying that. Yeah, everything's fine. This is fine. Like that dog with the house on fire around it, that popular meme.
Yeah, but that's where people sit. God, particularly us Midwesterners, we're so good. Like, some of the other places in our country even get so good at it. Like, even in Stranger Things, like watching Argyle like sit and break these Midwestern Indiana kids away from their they're shutting everything down, and he's just like, wow, man,
he's a very vulnerable person.
He is,
but he's having all of those feelings and all of those, like, openness about it, and like just sitting and talking about it, where Jonathan looks like he wants to crawl out of his skin and be anywhere other than where he is. And Argyle's just sitting and going, like, man, you just got to sit in that, and like, just hit the ball, man. Just feel it. Like, and it's so interesting to see that other subcultures exist even within our country that some people don't have access to, like us lovely folks who live where the air hurts our face for some reason.
And
for half the year.
Because that's also like a core word that we haven't even said yet, is vulnerable. And when I use the word vulnerable with clients, you'd think I just spit venom on their face. They're like, ugh, ugh. Don't Speak that into existence, please.
I feel like I very much have to think about how I'm going to say vulnerable, because the way that I bring it up and the context with which I bring it up. And I think it's really natural, because I think for some people, especially people who are experiencing or have been socialized like we all have, that there's good feelings. That there's good feelings and bad feelings, is that when I say the word vulnerable, I think a lot of times people envision, well, that means that I'm just walking around like vomiting my feelings on everyone.
Or I'm open
like
to attack.
Yeah, exactly.
In my world, it's usually that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And really vulnerable just is being willing to be open.
Yes.
And in my experience, and I'm a little idealistic, is that vulnerability begets vulnerability more often than not. And in my experience, the more vulnerable I am, the more vulnerability I get back at me.
Yes.
And it's almost like everyone's been waiting, like vulnerability chicken. Everyone's been waiting for the first person to be vulnerable. And they're like, oh, okay, fine.
Exactly.
You know, as much as we say like Midwesterns will shut down and they will do a good... Also, there are a lot of moments where it's like they've been waiting for someone to give them permission to be more honest with how they're feeling.
Absolutely.
But they need it modeled first, which is what we see in this movie.
They not only need it modeled, they need to feel safe.
Yeah.
Which what the modeling does, but they need it to feel safe, because Midwesterners, how uncomfortable do we feel when we go to the South and people are much more collectivistic?
Helpful, open, offering help.
Kind.
We don't know what to do.
What do you want? What do you what's your angle, bro?
Or to the West, where people
So we're
are
defensive.
and isolative and
absolutely.
like disengaging, and look at people like, wait, I am on Mars. Or worse, like, why do so many people, like when you go up to the American West, go like, where am I? Like these people are talking about their feelings and openly discussing their therapy. What universe am I in right now? Like Midwesterners do fine, I think, in the Northeast, which is a little harsher culture than ours, I think, where we go like, yeah, I got this. This is fine. Don't talk to me. I won't talk to you. And if you need something from me or I need something from you and we're close, that's cool. I got your back. But otherwise, I don't exist. This works. We got this.
So everyone from these different regions we're discussing, write in and tell us how accurate we're being about your personal
Yeah, we would
experience.
love to hear.
But no, you're right in that, like, even me as a therapist, and I wonder if you guys have the same experience, the amount of times I'm with all therapists and they get surprised how open I am about being in therapy.
Yeah.
As if, like, even as therapists, where this is our job and you think it'd be super normalized for us.
Absolutely.
There's still a lot of hard-headedness around, well, I'm the expert, so I don't need therapy. There's still this idea that going to therapy is a weakness somehow.
I have heard so much ridiculous shit from therapists about why they don't go, or, well, I'll just be criticizing how they're doing it. It's like,
that's a defense mechanism for sure, Skis.
Absolutely. And also, that's not what it's there for. And if you don't understand what it's there for, what are you doing in session with people?
What are you doing?
Like, it really deepens the value of being a therapist when you are a client yourself.
Yeah.
Because it really helps you understand the dynamic in a lot of ways. And I also, going back a little bit to vulnerability, just in general, something that usually most of the time when I talk to clients about when we kind of decide who they're going to be vulnerable with for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And I always make sure that we're kind of talking about someone that we know, someone that we feel safe with. Like, we have all of these things that we have to make sure so that you feel comfortable enough to do it. But then I talk about, so what you're doing when you're being vulnerable is you're giving that person a chance to respond in a different way. Mm-hmm. And you're also giving them a chance to know you a little bit better.
Oh, yeah.
And so when you, and I said, and I'm going to be honest with you, most of the time, it's been pretty rare when I have clients who do this for the first time with someone, it almost always goes pretty well.
Yeah, I agree.
Because I think what you said, Brittany, vulnerability begets vulnerability. And which is also a part of why being a therapist and talking about being in my own therapy, there's all these rules about disclosing and stuff, but that a part of letting a client know that I too am a human.
Yeah.
It is hard.
We're not above it.
I'm not above it.
Above
Sometimes
having
my
feelings.
therapist says things to me and I'm like, oh crap, you're right.
Yeah.
And I didn't think about it that way. And also then that's really helpful.
Yeah.
So
The more traumatized your client is, the more human you must be.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I say
Yeah.
in that similar vein, Hannah, is what I tell people, and I try to tell myself this too, is you have to give people the opportunity to pleasantly surprise you.
Yes.
So what I think I'm hearing is that these two V's, not just as validation beget or vulnerability beget vulnerability, but or the way you said it was better, whatever. I just screwed it up.
Yeah, it's
I'll own
fine.
that.
It's fine.
Basically,
right.
if you're vulnerable, if you express vulnerability, you will actually be less vulnerable, you idiot. And then I screwed it up. So that's fine. I'll own that. See, like I'm being vulnerable. But
Here it is.
Yeah.
now I'm uncomfortable because I'm in Western and my face is turning red. But anyway, that in order to get validation, you must first be vulnerable.
People have to know that you need validation.
Absolutely.
Because with our emotional system, you have to get from the same training something that has also springboarded my understanding. So I hope I can relay it to you in more relatable terms than this person is very academic and it is very dense. But I'm going to try to relay it in relatable terms. Is that emotion is biography and affect is biology.
Okay.
And he went into a very long, detailed, very, very helpful description from there. But basically what
Nerd
we're...
alert. But yeah.
I mean, he's a very accomplished researcher, that's
sure,
a
sure.
Absolutely.
specific
Sure.
brand of person,
Yeah.
which those of us that are therapists usually are not. But looking at that, what that means is that emotions are the way we assign the story to what we've been through. But affect, your facial expressions and body language are non-negotiable outward expressions of your emotions that we use to communicate to other humans what our mood state is. And we tell ourselves all sorts of hilarious lies that I got this, I got it contained. But you know what kind of mood someone is in. You sense it because you need that for your survival. Because human beings are pack animals. We do not exist alone. Therefore, I must be able to interpret your mood, your status, your intentions, your interactions with me immediately at a sensory level, not at a cognitive level.
Yeah. And I think a good example is when she starts crying in class, her teacher notices it, obviously, it's hard to miss, and says, moving to a new place is really hard. And validates her. Grants it in front of all of her brand new peers, which would be a nightmare.
I mean, come on,
That's
lady.
a core memory, babe.
Come
Like, when
on.
she has a
Come
core
on,
memory, I'm
teacher.
like, yeah. I mean, when I was going through my first...
And we're doing EMDR on that. Follow my fingers. Follow my fingers.
Yeah. Because, to be vulnerable myself, when I was going through my first big spell of depression when I was a senior in high school, I cried for no reason in the middle of a math class during a test. And was just so trying to shut that down because I was like, what? Because you do feel a little crazy. Like, I was like, I don't know why I'm crying. I don't know why I'm so upset. And I didn't tell anybody. And so no one validated me. So I just sat with that feeling until I couldn't anymore. One other thing I wanted to highlight about this section was this idea of dialectical thinking, which is something I also bring up, which is touched upon in this movie, obviously not on those terms because it's a child's movie. But I think what we see with joy is I think joy gets stuck in this idea, which people do a lot, which is if I'm feeling sadness, then I can't be feeling joy. Or like you have to pick a side with how you're feeling. Like I have to pick a feeling.
Right.
Yes.
And so what dialectical thinking is and why I love using it, and I talk about it constantly in therapy with clients, is you don't have to pick a side. You can hold two quote unquote conflicting thoughts or conflicting experiences or conflicting feelings simultaneously. And the way you do it, it's very simplistic, is you put the word and in the middle. And what do I mean by that? I feel really happy that I'm making new friends, and I feel really sad that I don't get to be with my old friends anymore. We get locked. That's more of like her age, Riley's kind of example.
Yes.
But I think that's where we get stuck, even as adults, is, well, I can't really like enjoy my new friends because I really miss my old friends. So I'm betraying them by enjoying my new friends. Or I can't acknowledge that I'm missing home because I'm trying to love my new home so much. And so we paint ourselves into a corner where we have to pick a side, and it really causes a lot of distress.
Yeah.
And when people come to sessions with me, they'll be like, I can't process what I'm feeling because I feel like I have to decide that I hate my father because he hurt me, or that, I really love my mother because she did work so hard for me, but she did some heinous shit. And what I tell people is you can acknowledge both those things. You can love your mother for all the beautiful things she's done for you, and you can be angry with her for all the things that she didn't. Letting people have that experience and letting yourself have that experience is so relieving. And it is sometimes that simple change in how you say it to yourself. Instead of saying but or because or so, just saying and.
Yes.
I feel this way and I feel that way. And that's okay. And you can sit in that dialectic forever.
Yeah.
Yep. And to put that back to the same point we were talking about earlier, is that sounds like yet another way to repackage the same idea I mentioned of what is the core thing that you're doing there? You're defeating shame.
Yeah.
You are letting them know it is okay to be feeling both of these things. You don't have to pick one, which means you can let them both go and not need to be feeling like one is good and one is bad. And that's why I think it's so important that you hear things from different avenues, from different therapists that have been trained in different ways. Brittany has worked in IOPs and PHPs, and therefore has been heavily trained in DBT and CBT, which is what she's talking about now. And Brittany's also trained in many things. She's an awesome therapist.
She is. She's the best.
But the language she's using right now from her deep lexicon of knowledge is from DBT, Dialectical Behavioral Therapy.
Yepers.
Which is basically the MMA of therapy.
No fucking doubt.
No
fucking doubt.
No hold bar or whatever.
It's the Krav Maga, which is like the Israeli martial art. For those who don't know, the Israeli martial art of how do I fuck you up immediately.
Well, it doesn't feel like that. Well, I'll take that back. It can feel like that. And DBT is pretty common now. It's kind of, I always joke that it's sort of like the sophisticated older cousin of CBT. And that CBT is pretty basic, cognitive behavioral therapy, and then DBT kind of takes it up several levels.
Yeah, it's CBT plus you have feelings, so sit in them and stop trying to control them.
And the big part of it is radical acceptance, which we've been talking about, which is what's in my control and what's not. And I tell clients all the time, your feelings are not in your control. That is outside that circle.
Yep.
But what you choose to do with your feelings when you have them, that is in your control. So we need to let go of that idea that you control your feelings. And if you can refocus on what's in your control, your actions, and what you do with it, you will feel so much better. It's not that it's going to be not uncomfortable, as we've said at length, but it will. I always tell people it's like if you're sitting in a room and you're banging your head against a wall, waiting for it to become a door, and because you just like, this is the only way out.
Yes.
And if you just radically accept that I can't do anything about this, if you let yourself turn around and there's a window and there's a trap door and there's a ceiling like a skylight, that there are other avenues to still get out of that space you're in, but you gotta let go of this one angle, which is that I can just control this something that I can't control, and that's almost everything. So moving on, we can take a break here, and then we'll move on to identity and growing up. So a big part of this movie is the islands, sort of core memories in the islands, and a big part of this movie is all those islands crumbling down. So it's like Goofball Island, Family Island, Hockey Island, and really
Friendship.
all that
Friendship
Island.
And Goofy.
Yeah, Goofball.
Silly, yeah.
What we're seeing in this movie is her growing up and hitting this transitional period. Like there's the big move for sure, which is a huge adjustment, and that's kind of the activating event for a lot of this crumble. But also she's 11. She's at Eric Erickson, classic name, had stages of development, and she is at the very beginning of your adolescent stage, 11 to 19, which is identity versus role confusion. And this is the time in your life when you start have like quote unquote an identity crisis, because you're a lot more hooked into how others perceive you, and you're just a lot more aware of yourself in a way that usually does cause a lot of pain. That's why your teenage years suck entirely.
That's why they're
for the most
hard.
part.
Yeah.
Particularly the ages of 11 to 13 are where kids are the worst to you, and you care the most. It's not till you hit 15 or 16 towards the end of that, like after you find
Middle
yourself.
school.
Yep, middle school. 11 to 13. Brutality.
Because their feelings are so big,
Yep.
and they essentially don't have the brain development to do anything with those feelings in a way that feels like it matches the intensity of how they're feeling it.
And the shame that they feel over
Yes.
having it and being different or basically anything does not allow them to digest it or process it, so they stay stuck in survival modes, which I will talk to later because I have a different perspective on the islands than Brittany, but I will get to that later.
And yeah, like if you watch Big Mouth, the Shame Wizard, they're about this age. And the Shame Wizard is a big character on that show. And
He does
into that.
And he does a great job. And so does the anxiety mosquito of presenting the true experience of having those feelings.
it's brutal, dude.
It's brutal.
It's brutal. Oh, yeah. And so Riley is at an age, I know we have, and I'm sure you're going to build on this, Ben, in a way I didn't think about, but she is at the age where it makes sense she'd be reconstituting those islands.
Absolutely.
And though it's done in sort of a traumatic way because of this big adjustment and transition in her life and not really processing it in a way that's helpful at first.
Yeah.
They kind of shut down and they do get rebuilt back up in a way. Oh my God, the names they gave them, I wrote them down. Let me see. Vampire Island. This is like a real attack on my personhood.
Oh yeah, it's
these
tragic.
new island.
The new islands.
Fashion Island, Boy Band Island, Friend Island comes back up, Vampire Island. Ugh, fuck
Tragic
you.
Vampire Boyfriend Islands is what the actual name of it is.
God, I have no original experiences.
you
dude.
don't. You don't.
Well, neither does anyone else. See,
Yeah,
look at the
exactly.
shame. Look at the shame. There it is.
Yeah,
Listen, we all have our
absolutely.
entry point vampire. Mine
I
was
mean,
Buffy the Vampire Slayer, okay?
Okay, so
Well, what?
Twilight sold billions of dollars of stuff for a reason, even though it's trash.
Yeah.
It's trash, you guys.
I was not the target demographic for that. I'm just gonna.
You definitely were not. So one of the things that I was thinking about in terms of identity is that what I thought was really interesting is something I've been thinking about since I saw this movie for the first time. I've watched this movie, I don't know, 1,000 billion times, who knows how many times. But a part of what I recognized and was so interested by is the fact that we see what's really, magical about this film, which I'll get to in final thoughts later, is that we see what it's also like in Dad's brain. We also see what it's like in Mom's brain. And so what's really interesting is that all of Dad's feelings are male presenting. All of Mom's feelings are female presenting. Where Riley has mixed. She has a little bit of both. And so that always struck me as such a beautiful example of how they're trying to figure out their identity, whether or not it's about who they are
Gender-wise?
like gender affirming in any way, even though I think that might be a part of it too, because it's also a part of their development in terms of where their little brains and their bodies are.
We know she hasn't hit puberty yet, so
Yes.
the external sex characteristics have not yet really hit.
Yes.
So, yes, I think that is a valid point.
So I feel like, when I recognized that, I was like, isn't that so interesting? They did so many beautiful things in this film, but I feel like that is so interesting to have it shown that way. And I guess I wonder if anybody else out there noticed that, because I remember thinking like, how interesting is that? But also that makes sense, Ben.
Yeah.
Like it's also because she hasn't gone through puberty. And so those different pieces of understanding herself as a sexual being, it's not a part of her process yet, because it can't be because of the stage of development that she is at.
And yeah, right. And secondary sex characteristics is the word I was looking for, not
secondary.
external,
Yeah.
because that has more to. It's not just the external. There's internal things too. But yes, that matters. And I know I had not considered it that way, and I think that that's a brilliant insight and why I love the way we do the show, because Brittany's talking about the Ericksonian developmental stage conflicts, which was part of the way that occurred to my brain, and Hannah's point didn't even remotely occur to my brain. Because I got so caught up in the way I was seeing it, and all three of these points are going to be equally as valid. is that when I was watching, I was going like, oh, look, there's my friend Trauma again. Because as we see her go through this film, what we are seeing from another point of view is that she starts losing access to resources as her survival parts become more active.
Absolutely.
Happiness, joy, and sadness are not survival parts. And the more distressed she gets, the more isolated from the command center they become.
Yes.
And the more isolated those become, the more she loses her resources, the more irrational she becomes, the more anger, disgust, and fear are disinhibited and granted control over the system. And we see that where we are giving Lewis Black control of our brain.
What a perfect actor to voice anger. That's like his brand.
Oh my gosh.
Is anger.
Glorious. It was glorious.
The casting of that was just, I mean, all the casting was perfect. 'Cause
Oh, absolutely.
like Mindy Kaling is disgust. Yes, I'm here for it. And Bill Hader can do whatever he wants. But Lewis Black, just the man who made candy corn funny and being angry about it. Like he's
Oh, I used to miss that. Did you do that on The Daily Show where he'd come on The Daily Show and just rip something to shreds?
Oh my gosh, I loved it.
just whatever anger. But like looking
Yeah.
at this movie, you see, have you ever wanted to understand parts theory? Here you go.
Yeah.
Here is a film for you of like, look, joy becomes separate. And usually when you're healthy, which the point of this movie shows, your parts and your memories are integrated and you're able to recall them with the multicolor, like little orbs that we see towards the end of the movie where all the memories come with all of the colors where you're able to go, oh yeah, that was all of these things. Without assigning one any more value than the other. But when you start forcing yourself to isolate parts away from each other, the identities that get associated with them start forming, and the more distress you get under, the more the survival parts take over and start limiting you from feeling anything. And when she was on that bus and they were talking about how she can't feel anything at all and she's just doing, I went like, and there it is. There it is. I went like, yes! Yes, finally! We are expressing it in a way that is going to go over everyone's head because they're going to ignore it. God damn it. But like, yes, it's genius!
Yeah.
Because the more we become stuck in survival, the less ability we have to access who we are and what we are, and the more we think we just need to do something to fucking survive.
And even that's so beautiful, Ben. And even the fact that anger and fear don't understand how to make her feel okay because they can't.
Nope, that's not what they're for.
Because that's not what they're for. And how the confusion that we clearly see on Riley's face is also a part of the way that her parts inside are also confused. They do so many things in so many different ways. So that was, I love that, Ben.
Thank you. Like, I love both of your points too, and it's like what I like about this is all three of us went like, yep, and it like aligned with each of our theoretical orientations differently, and
Yeah,
that's why
that's true.
thinking like which therapist is for me also matters, because how you're looking at the world isn't going to necessarily be the same as how I do it.
Yeah.
And is the way I'm going to look at it helpful to? Probably, but is that going to be helpful to you in the way that you need it right now? That's for you to decide.
Because I'm thinking of the way I'm thinking of it, because as a child therapist, you have to be aware of where the kids you're working at are developmentally, because you have to make sure you're hitting them at that age where they understand what you're talking about.
Yes.
And kind of how this movie ends, like you guys were saying, how the orbs will have all the colors now, is part of growing up, is you have to start mixing it all together and you have to start letting that happen. The way that Joy gets upset. I mean, a big part of this movie is Riley's growing up, because Joy gets really upset that they're those like forgetting little employees. They do the forgetting. They're like, we can forget all the names of all the princesses of this. And she's like, no, she needs them. And it's like, no, she's moving on.
She's growing up.
And things get more sophisticated. You start being able to think abstractly and more nuanced and deeply.
Absolutely.
And you're not these cookie cutter feelings anymore. Like they were showing as a baby, you're either happy because something joyful is happening, or you're sad because something made you cry, or you are angry because you don't like broccoli.
Yeah,
and
sure.
So it is also recognizing that kids' feelings are going to get more sophisticated, and we have to meet them where they're at and trying to keep them locked in this age where you can just cheer them up. like you can with a littler kid, is just not realistic anymore. And it's just going to shut them down, piss them off, distance them from you, and validate them, all the things that we see in this movie.
And to tie all three of these together in a neat little bow for you is that in order to understand the person that you're working with, you must also be able to understand at which point in time you're interacting with a part whose experience may have created a blockage for them that got them stuck in a different developmental stage than their body and age present as. And when you're interacting with that part, you might need to adjust your expectations, your technique, and your language in order to adjust to where that part is at, because the part you're talking to might be in a different role struggle, and that part may be in a different place where it understands the concept through a different lens entirely. Like a more youthful thing might think, oh, well, I can only access it if I act like this or that. Like Hannah was talking about, like that could be something that's blocked by a gendered response. Like, well, boys can be angry and I can't. Because men and women are taught differently. Or for boys, that, you know, like, not that gender is as simple as boy or girl. I don't want to come across that way, but that is how people are frequently taught. And looking at that,
that's how we're socialized.
That's how we're socialized.
Yeah,
right.
Unfortunately.
But boys are frequently taught, and I have conversations with men about this all the time, cis men, that how were we taught growing up? If you had emotions on the playground, if you were the sad kid, whose ass got beat first?
The sad kid.
The sad kid. Your ass got beat. So you learned real fucking quick to be the angry kid or the neutral kid, and you were fine. But if you were the sad kid, you're the target. To be able to even understand that depending on where the trauma is, where this person that you're talking to has different parts within inside themselves, and you have to adjust to which one you're talking to, because it might have a different perspective entirely than where you think this person is.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Right. And on that, we'll take our final break, and we'll slide into treatment and final thoughts. So we discussed treatment before we record most of the time. And when we were talking about treatment today, we kind of just wanted to give a very simple treatment, which is, hey, people, watch this movie and use this movie. Because this is actually one of the few examples of movies we've talked about, maybe the only one really so far, where this movie is actually used as a therapeutic tool.
Yes.
Once this movie came out, it just blew the doors wide open I was only doing child therapy at that time for pretty young kids.
Yeah.
And people were just so excited to have this movie to use as a therapeutic device in talking to little kids about their feelings. Even just using the emotions in this movie as a visual.
Yep.
And explaining all these feelings and how it's good and valid to have all these feelings, and giving kids permission to have these feelings. And so really our treatment in this episode is just listen to this movie, watch this movie, listen to this movie, recommend this movie to others, bring it into therapy if it makes sense to bring it into therapy. And also something I wanted to highlight as well, and kind of piggybacking what we were just talking about before the break, is that there's a lot of worth to being hooked into child psychology. People get really split in this industry of either I work with kids or I don't.
Yes.
And I would say I started out, my trainings as a child therapist is what my master's degree is in specifically. And I did a lot of just children at the onset of my career. And now I work with all ages.
Yeah.
And kind of have for a while now. And the amount of worth that I get from my child therapy stuff that I bring in with adults, because your inner child, it never leaves you. So, and the amount of like help that I can see it with my clients is what I will just say to everybody out there. If you're a therapist in training or like a therapist in general, don't poo-poo child therapy stuff. Work with kids a little bit if you can, because that'll give you a lot of insight. What you were saying too, Ben, of like people are still, parts of them are still these ages. And so bringing in the kind of interventions I would use with kids brings a lot of like whimsy and joy and silliness and vulnerability into sessions, that it can be deeply healing for these parts of us that are still little. And so things like this that's quote unquote for kids are still for adults. And so that is my little treatment note. And also kind of more reflecting on it too, use this as a lesson, parents. Because I'll tell you what the big fuck up of this movie is. And I wrote that in my notes. And I said it to Hannah when we were watching it.
Yep.
When the dad clocks the attitude on her in that dinner scene and then shuts her the fuck down.
Yep.
When your kid's acting different, note that from an emotional place.
Yep.
Don't just react to the behavior. That whenever your kid's acting out of character, that is a good opportunity to say, hey, something seems off. Can you help me understand what's going on? Ask an open-ended question from a place of calm availability instead of reacting to, am I being disrespected? Especially in this context in which it seems like this is like the first time she's ever misbehaved like this.
Yeah, that's what
and
it
they give
seems
her
like.
no wiggle room.
No, none at all.
And there's no curiosity.
No, he activated Red Foreman in his brain. Foot in ass.
Foot in ass entirely. And so my only little treatment note to all the parents out there is to approach your kids with curiosity when they're acting differently or acting just disrespectfully or just, get hooked into why this is going on, not what is going on. And kind of saying what we were talking about before, I know that the parents are also strained in their own way and who knows how they're dealing, if they're dealing at all, and how they're helping each other. So they might also be coming from a depleted state and reacting more triggering with her.
Sure,
But-
they're losing resources too.
Yeah. But just something I wanted to hit upon in the treatment section.
Yep. The only thing I will add to that other than watch this movie, and if you have watch it again and watch it one more time. Because there's layers to this. There's neuroscience, there's behavioral science, there's trauma therapy, there's child therapy, there's identity issues, and all of it plays in, and you can watch it differently each time, and it's beautiful. But also remember what Brittany said about parents. This is going to be the trauma therapist in the room. Anybody in your life starts acting different, and like whatever they're reacting to might not just be about whatever's going on. Approach with curiosity, back off, slow down,
Yeah.
and question empathically, what is going on for you? What is different about this for you right now? Because whatever just got activated is not probably what you think. And if it doesn't match and doesn't make sense, it's for a reason.
And I think what I will kind of jump on and add a little bit of is also parents, you have to learn how to manage your own fucking responses. You have got to learn that escalating along with your child who doesn't have a choice because of the stage of development that they're at is not ever going to be helpful.
You don't want to be that adult who's arguing with an 8-year-old.
You don't want to be an adult who is trying to alpha dog a fucking kid. So, and what's so important about that I talk a lot to everyone that I work with about is that you are modeling, you're modeling the behavior.
Yeah.
This is a chance for you to maybe do something different than maybe you experienced. This is your chance to do that. So really learning how to manage your own response. Because look, kids are hard. They're frustrating. They know sometimes just how to get under our skin, and that's just a part of where they are developmentally most of the time. And so really learning that they are a child, you are an adult, it is your job to learn, if you don't know how, to manage your responses so that you can come to the kid with curiosity. So you can ask what is going on instead of why is this happening? The why question is almost never helpful. Never. Why is not we don't know why. We don't control our thoughts and feelings. We don't fucking know why. So asking that question is not helpful and often makes them feel like they have to shut down. The other thing, I love this movie, or I'm not supposed to be talking about
Well,
that.
we can go to final thoughts.
It's
We can
okay.
go to
Well,
final
I
thoughts.
have one thing to add before we do that.
Okay.
Is to piggyback on Hannah, because like yet again, each of us is gonna.
It's like a human centipede over here.
Yikes.
Why? I feel like I need to put on a cape and cowl
Yeah.
and hang you by your ankles and just drop you off a building repeatedly until you ask me, why did you say that?
I call dibs on A. The A in the human centipede.
Just,
Oh God, I don't know what one to pick. I haven't seen it.
You- it's none of them.
always
I don't want to be.
You always
I don't want
wanna
to be in it. I
You
don't want to
always
be.
wanna be
I
in
don't
it.
want to be in the centipede.
Anyway, no, what I wanted to piggyback is off Hannah is the other thing why parents need to regulate their stuff is because of attachment level trauma. I know we talked about this in other things, but if you teach a child that it might be more unsafe for me to tell you what's going on because you will get dysregulated, then they learn that the choice is either to freeze or fawn and shut down, and almost never to just express vulnerability to gain validation, because that then becomes inherently dangerous to them and they don't do it, and then they can't connect to people in real ways until that person goes above and beyond to prove they're safe because you could not regulate your shit when dealing with a child.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So don't make it dangerous for your child to express emotions by then having to worry about your reaction to their emotions.
Yep.
Because I mean, even in this film, we see Riley can tell. Mom seems frazzled. Dad seems stressed
I'm gonna
out.
run away.
Yeah, like exactly.
Running away makes more sense than telling you what I'm feeling because
Yeah.
you'll be mad.
Exactly.
Don't
Yeah.
do that.
We're gonna talk about Coraline this season, and I'll tell you what,
Ooh,
that's kind of the
girl.
anti-
I'm so excited to talk
Inside
about that
Out.
one. I'm so excited.
I have not seen that yet, so I need to work on it.
so excited for you.
Oh my
what a
God.
gift! Look
Yeah.
in front of you
What a gift.
to watch Coraline for the first time.
Agreed.
All right.
Agreed.
So before we get into tangents, final thoughts.
I will go first, I guess, because I'm the one who just took a huge breath. In case anyone was wondering who was doing that, it's usually me. I love this film. I love Inside Out. My mind was blown. I think I was in my internship when it came out, I think. And seeing what they show in this film is actually what our brains do. This is not a let's make up the story. This is accurate information in terms of how our core beliefs and our core memories shape our personality islands, and how that process works. That's exactly how it works. So I love this film for so many different reasons, but a really big part of it is that it's so accessible. I tell all of my clients to watch this film. I tell all of them, it's like, look, I know that you might think it's a kid movie, but it has some really valuable information that makes it very accessible to understand, even when they're lost in long-term memory. Even when they're lost in there and they see the workers who are like, nah, we don't need any of these phone numbers anymore because she's got a cell phone. So all those different pieces. So I really love this film. I really love to use this film as a therapist. And everybody should watch it. If you haven't watched it, just friggin' watch it. It's fun, and it just gives a lot of information in a really beautiful way. And I love this movie so much. Okay, I'm done.
I'll go next. I also love it. I remember I watched it with my much younger brothers, and they were the age of watching this movie, but I was like the one crying at the end. And it's such a good movie. It, like you were saying, it explains such sophisticated psychological concepts in such simple ways that are so digestible for children and adults. Basically anyone who doesn't have like a psych degree, you can love it at any different level. If you have a psych degree, it's so impressive in one way. If you don't, it is really an educational way into a lot of concepts. I wish this movie had been around when I was a kid. I'm a classic example of someone who was a very happy kid, and then I got sad all of a sudden. And I'm still sad sometimes as an adult because it's never all the way goes away. I struggled with this dynamic of having one identity and then flipping it really hard, and then all the adults around me kind of not knowing what to do with that. So I really wish it would have been interesting, the effect this movie would have had on me if I watched it as a kid, just in terms of validating my experience. Oh my God. So I'm really grateful it exists to not just validate other kids who are going through similar experiences, but also to hopefully showcase to parents how to respond to your kid if they are going through a similar transition.
Yeah, I love this film too. I think this film is phenomenal. I think that, like you guys have said, it just illustrates neuroscience and biology and dream and the processing and so many concepts about like how your brain works, how the different functions of things work. And the layers at which this amazing thing that occupies the inside of your skull works.
Yeah.
And it's just brilliant.
That's what I was just thinking. It's just a brilliant film.
Like learning to understand that emotions can cause things that are even lost in the deepest recesses of your mind to then suddenly go, look, there's color there again. And poof, all of a sudden it moves back from long-term storage into active memory. And understanding that, I'm like, I haven't watched this in a while and I'd forgotten, and now I'm going like, every one of my EMDR clients is watching this before I do EMDR with them.
Oh, absolutely.
Aw,
Absolutely.
that's cute.
That's great. Yeah.
Because that is like literally the entire basis of how this therapy works is like, hey, you know those times when you had a feeling that doesn't make an ounce of fucking sense to what you're experiencing, but all of a sudden your body is reacting totally differently to what's going on? Or these weird emotional experiences get tied together on a string where you go like, well, I don't know why I've been doing that or why this thing is, and then you go like, okay, so what I'm going to have you do is activate all of these different layers of emotion and go like, I need to know the image, I need to know the feeling, I need to know the negative thought, and I need to know the body reaction. And as soon as I tie that together, whatever mystery becomes apparent in 10 seconds, in like 10 minutes of therapy can automatically like open doors that have been locked forever. And this movie just goes like, and here's a way to show that with an elephant clown thing.
Bing bong.
Bing bong.
And Bing Bong himself illustrates so many concepts by himself that this movie is perfect. And
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
I was thinking, Brittany, you were talking about like your experience of like us having the happy emotions. I have exposed my child to Land Before Time.
Oh, fuck.
And that's what we grew up with. But I'm like going back and watching that and going like, what the fuck? Because like this kid's mom dies and the only interaction he has with an adult before he gets back to his grandparents is this old crusty fucking stegosaurus like creature, Ankylosaur, I don't know what it is, that just goes pretty much, life sucks, kid. You gotta move on.
Yeah.
And then walks away and leaves him in the desert by his damn self at 5 years old after his mom just got eaten by a T-Rex in front of him. And he's just like, yep, well, that's the way it is.
I knew there was a reason why I didn't go back and watch that as an adult.
I can't wait until we finally do a never-ending story on this podcast.
I
It's not on the
know.
docket for this season, but that's what it made me
Next
think
season.
of. It's
Next
like
season.
The movies from back in the day, they're coming at you.
But-
they're coming at you hard.
I sobbed my tiny little heart out when I saw Land Before Time.
I still remember
Yeah.
how the movie makes me feel. It gives me a
Yeah, I
stomach
can.
ache to
Yeah, I
think
can
about
feel
it.
the feeling in my body right now.
like it's still like, yeah, watching Littlefoot's mom die and like just all of that, but then like
Littlefoot.
all of the kids like and I still remember the puppets from Pizza Hut. But anyway,
What?
Oh yeah.
I'll bring them, I'll show you. It's gonna
Maybe
it
they
will
got-
activate old things that have been gone forever, like just happened for Hannah. Anyway, this movie is perfect, and watch it because it will provide a psychological education that you won't get from like 3 years of college.
Well, on that note, we will sign off here. But as always, you can find us at Twitter on popcorn_psych. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Popcorn Psychology. You can always email us at popcornpsychology@gmail.com if you have any feedback or suggestions or recommendations. You can also find us on Patreon. We have a patron page. And if you are a top tier patron, $50 or more, you can pick the subject of an episode. We just released Gone Girl, which was a patron picked episode. We also have a TeePublic account if you want to buy any of our merch. And always leave us a review if you can. If you haven't already, a 5-star review would be beautiful, but any review. And it really helps us get found by other people. And it's the best way for newer listeners to find us. So thank you and have the day you deserve.